Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Liu Xin, and this is The Point. The Civil Aviation Administration of China, or CAAC, announced on Thursday it will ease rules for foreign airlines starting June the 8th. Foreign airlines excluded from an earlier pact will now be able to operate one commercial passenger flight to China a week. The move comes as China continues to make efforts to prevent COVID-19 from spilling into its borders. The U.S. Transportation Department announced it will revise the ban on Chinese passenger flights it announced earlier this week. So why are both sides changing course, and are they related, and what does it mean for the travel industry at large? For more, I'm joined from Washington, D.C. via Skype by Mark Weiss, a former American Airlines captain, and in Beijing by Mr. Dai Xianfeng, Senior Fellow from the National Institute for Finance and Development. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. First, I just need to give our audience a recap of the recent timeline. So on January the 31st, the U.S. government imposed partial travel ban on China. Major U.S. carriers voluntarily halted all flights to China in February. On March the 12th, China announced each foreign airline could maintain one weekly flight on one route to China. U.S. carriers by default were excluded from that quota. Now, on June the 3rd, the U.S. announced an order suspending Chinese carriers from going to the U.S., effective June the 16th. And on June the 4th, China said it will allow all foreign airlines that hadn't been allowed to operate in China since March the 12th to operate one flight a week. Then, a day later, the U.S. said it planned to revise its ban on Chinese carriers from flying to the United States. So it's quite a story. But Mr. Dai, let me go to you. Give us a bit of a background based on the timeline that we produced. Exactly what is the situation here? What are we talking about?
Yeah, if you look at what's going on right now globally, you have to put it into context, the global pandemic. So when we have the global pandemic going on, every country, they have to evaluate between reopening the economy and controlling the spread of the virus. A lot of time is a very delicate balance. And for China, China has basically got the virus under control right now. But the problem is the infection rate is so low, there's no herd immunity, to speak of. So the population is really vulnerable to the second wave or third wave. Therefore, China is, people are worried about a potential reoccurrence. And
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Weiss, how do you look at this back and forth? First, the U.S. imposed the partial travel ban, and then they wanted China to allow them to fly back. And then they were threatening China that they were going to ban Chinese carriers from going to the United States. And then China said, OK, we're going to open to all foreign carriers. And then the U.S. says, OK, we're going to continue to allow. Is that what we're seeing here?
Well, I think you have to look at this. It's a couple of different components. One of them is certainly an economic component. The airlines in the United States voluntarily ceased operations to a lot of places overseas, China included, because the demand with the virus just dissipated. It was gone. So flying empty airplanes didn't make economic sense to them. The other part of it is the political sense, the politics involved with this. We all know about the crisis. You were talking about it earlier in the United States. This is a time where the president is trying to look very strong, trying to deflect negative publicity for what's going on with the riots, with the high unemployment, with his poor handling of the virus. He's trying to deflect all of this, and now by and looking like a strong man, to ban all flights, to ban flights from China coming in. Remember, President Trump has used China as a batting pole for a long time now. And that's probably going to continue, I think, sadly and incorrectly, but that's what's happening. The fact that the US and the Chinese now have reached a limited agreement, allows him to say, look, we've got more people going to be employed now. We've got flights going back and forth. Look what I did. This is great for all of us. The real winners, hopefully, will be all of the hundreds of thousands of Chinese students and others who are here, who are caught in this upheaval through no fault of their own. So hopefully, as the virus would dissipate and measures are put in place at airports with the airlines, restrictions could be lifted if nobody, there are no virus outbreaks. So I think that's really what's happening here in America.
Of course, it is to people's benefit if there are more people-to-people exchanges. But again, we have to look at the bigger context. And let's not forget, the United States still has a very high infection rate, right? On the day-to-day basis, still tens of thousands of people are infected, and then the casualty, the people who die from COVID-19, last time I checked, was to over 1,000. So it's fluctuating. So the situation is very bad. You cannot just ignore that. And yet, Mr. Dai, when the U.S. was announcing their plan to ban Chinese carriers from flying to the United States, they cited 4 Chinese carriers and no U.S. carriers operate between the U.S. and China. U.S. carriers have asked to resume passenger service beginning June the 1st. The Chinese government's failure to approve their request is a violation of our air transport agreement. Mr. Dai, is it really the case? And what could have prevented China from allowing U.S. carriers to resume flights?
Again, when we look at the current situation, you have to put it on the context of the global pandemic. And in any international policy, you have to look at each individual country. They have their own objective, they have their own constraints, and they try to resolve a problem. In terms of the international flight, China has its own objective. It try to really control the second wave of the virus. So, on the other hand, you try to reopen the economy domestically and globally. So it has to really balance a lot of stuff.
Yeah. It's the timing is also very, very interesting because basically things were developing by day, right? On the first day, the U.S. announced that it's going to ban Chinese carriers from going to the U.S. And then the next day, China announced that it's going to allow all international airlines to start to resume or to start easing restrictions. And then the next day, the U.S. said, okay, we probably won't ban Chinese. So, Mr. Weiss, how do you look at that? I mean, some people are saying China caved in to the pressure, to the maximum pressure threat coming from the United States. Could it also be the case? Because China is not saying, okay, the U.S., you are allowed to resume. It basically says all foreign carriers are allowed to ease the restrictions a little bit.
Well, take a look at it from a couple of points of view. I agree with you. I don't think China caved in on doing this. I think what they're doing is they're taking a look at the data available and saying, look, right now, if we put these measures in place, we can open up the aviation sector to the world. In the United States, certainly that is true as well, but it also plays to the political aspect of it. And again, I don't mean to overemphasize that, but here in the United States, we have a very high unemployment rate. If President Trump could not afford to have an airline go bankrupt prior to the November elections, it would, but again, this is a pandemic. It's a horrendous event that has to be viewed in epidemiological context as
Yeah.
well as an economic context.
Okay. Well, after the U.S. decided to revise their proposed ban, China stated on Thursday that China had expressed deep regret at the U.S.'s order, and both sides have been in close communication regarding flights between the two countries. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Zhao Lijian said, "We have had some progress. Now China has announced the policy adjustment. We hope the U.S. will not create obstacles for resolving this issue." And some in the U.S. are saying this is not enough. So, Mr. Dai, very briefly, what kind of obstacles are we talking about it, and why is it not enough for some people in the United States?
Yeah, in current situation, I mean, there's a lot of going on, and you got a trade war going on since 2018, and got a phase one deal for sure. But again, a lot of things going on. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure what kind of obstacles he's talking about, but I can imagine that could be anything. But again, like we said earlier, the global pandemic that really needs global cooperation and global coordination.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
So countries should talk to each other.
Absolutely. A small step, but a welcome one. Many thanks to Mark Weiss and Dai Xianfeng. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point, and have a good weekend.